Hello and welcome to Nullitaire Gaming, where we play games with 0 players. Or in other words, we play bots against one another. And in this series, we're playing People Power. This is part of the Coin series. It's Volume 11, Insurgency in the Philippines, 1981 to 1986, from GNT, designed by Kenneth T. And we've started a game already. We've played through the first campaign, up to the first election round. And so we're going to set up the board from where we left off and continue on. If you haven't seen the first few videos in this series, I recommend going back and starting from the beginning. I'll put a link in the description of this video to the entire playlist, so you can go back and watch it from the start if you like. Alright, let's set up the game from where we were and continue on. So the board is set up to where we left off. Now we have a new election card. Ninoy Aquino murdered. And we have personalities in play now. The government has General Fidel V. Ramos. The NPA has Jose Maria Sison. And the reformers have Corazon Aquino. And each one of those gives us special power. What it does is it modifies some operation for that faction. Okay, and the election card also has a modifying power. Okay, it counts as a momentum card, so that's in play also. All right, so basically things have changed quite a lot in how these bots will play this election round. And I imagine that means that we're going to see a lot more action. I think the first campaign was pretty, conservative. I think all the bots played pretty conservatively that first round. Not much really happened on the board. So I expect that we'll probably see some more action in this campaign. Okay, let's get started anyway. So the next card is IMF, and the government is up first. You can see that it's not a critical event for them, so they will try to do an operation and special ability instead. So the first card from the Bonifacio deck for the government says vulnerable reformer pieces in any space with police. And the answer to that is no. There are no vulnerable reformer pieces. The only base is here, and there are underground, inactive activists there. So that's not vulnerable. And none of the activists are active, so they're not vulnerable either. Okay, so the answer to that is no. We'll find a new card. Here's the next card for the government. It says 1d6 less than or equal to available cubes. Well, they have 4 available cubes, so they had to roll on that. And they rolled a 3. So the answer is yes. 3 is less than 4. Okay, assault in any one space could remove NPA base or 2 or more guerrillas. No. There's no place where the government could remove any guerrillas or a base. So we flip the card over, and it looks like the government is going to train. So select spaces using place cubes. So as I always do, I look to the operation and find out what locations are possible. Here it says any city and countryside spaces with government control or a government base. And then I just put pawns in each of those possible locations. So every city has a pawn, and the only countryside space that's under government control or has a government base, in this case both, is northern Luzon. So those are all selected with pawns right now. And then we'll go through the priorities for placing cubes, and we'll go down the list until we narrow it down to exactly one space. And when we've done that, that will be the space where the government will train. Okay, so first priority is no government control. Well, all those spaces are under government control, so that doesn't help. Next priority is vulnerable base of any faction. Those spaces only have government bases, and none of those are vulnerable. Okay, which means there are fewer than 2 cubes there in that space. And that's not true here. Okay, next is most population. Well, okay, that's obviously Manila. So they're going to train in Manila. So Manila is selected for train. They paid 2 resources for that, as required. Okay, and then at each selected city or government base, place up to 4 cubes. Well, it turns out they have exactly 4 police, so they will put those in Manila. Okay. The government doesn't have any more cubes to place, so they can't place any more cubes using train. So now they'll consider doing some civic action. And we're told that unless the operation is limited, civic action may target an additional space not yet selected. Which is interesting because Manila obviously is not a place they want to do civic action because it's already at support. But maybe they'll want to do civic action at, say, Cebu, which is not at support. So we'll have to see if they want to do that. Yes, they will do that, and it's pretty easy to see that. They're using shift towards support as priorities, so going down the list, space at opposition, space at resistance, and then space at neutral. Okay, well, again, they can only choose the cities or northern Luzon to train. The only one of those that isn't already at support is Cebu, and it's at neutral. So there you go. There's our priority to select it. So they pay 2 resources to select Cebu for train. They won't place any cubes because they don't have any, but they will use civic action to shift it. It is at government control. There's at least 1 troop. There's at least 1 police, so they can do that here. So they'll pay 2 resources and shift that to support. That's all the government can do with train. They don't have any more cubes to place. They can't shift any more spaces towards support. Alright, so they'll look for a special activity to do now. 83 campaign or later. Now it is the 83 campaign or later. So they'll consider this. Enrich in 1 space with activists or underground guerrillas using enrich. Okay, we'll see if they'll do that. So again, I've selected all the spaces where enrich can happen. It says any space with government control and support, not Manila. So all the spaces with government support and control, yeah, are all the cities except Manila and northern Luzon. Okay, and then they're going to use the priorities for enrich, which are here. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Most population. Well, those are all at 2, so that doesn't help. Most enemy pieces. That helps because there are no enemy pieces anywhere except northern Luzon, where there's an NPA piece. So northern Luzon will be the selected space. So now, following the procedures, add twice the selected space's population to patronage, then set the space to neutral, -1 to aid. That can only be done in 1 space. So that's the end of the government turn. They did a op and special activity. The reformers are next. They're also not interested in the event. And so they're only being presented with an operation. And when that happens, the bots always go for a limited operation instead. So they're going to try for a limited operation. So here's the Bonifacio card for the reformers. Government control in any 2+ population spaces. Yes, that's definitely true. 1 or more protest available. Yes. And inactive activists in any space with government control and no terror or strike. Yes, that's true, because there's a activist in Manila. So that's true. Okay. So, protest. First, at a government base with no cubes. There's no such thing. So, secondly, using protest. So I've selected all the spaces where protest is possible. And now we will consider the protest priorities. Government control. Okay, that narrows it down a little bit. Okay, these are not a government control. That's not a government control. Okay, so immediately we've narrowed it down to Manila. The reformers paid a resource to protest in Manila, putting a protest marker, and their activist becomes active. And now the space would normally just shift 1 toward opposition, so it would normally just go neutral, but protest set space to opposition instead of shifting now because of this momentum card. So It just goes straight to opposition. Because the reformers are only looking to do a limited operation, that's all they're going to do. The MPA is up next. They also are not interested in the event. And so, being only presented with operations, they're going to do the same as the reformers and take a limited operation. So here's the MPA's next card. So we start with 3d6 is greater than resistance plus MPA bases on the map. Well, resistance plus MPA bases is at 5 right now, so they have to roll on that, but they rolled much higher. Okay, so that is true. Underground Guerrilla in any 2+ population space not at resistance. Yeah, that's definitely true. Northern Luzon has an underground guerrilla, that's not at resistance. Eastern Mindanao has an underground guerrilla, that's not at resistance. Alright, so terror is what they want to try to do. Select spaces without resistance using place terror, and if there's an MPA base, only where 2 or more underground guerrillas. So there are 2 spaces where they could do this, and so they're going to use their place terror priorities to decide. Okay. So space not at resistance, neither one of those are at resistance. Countryside, they're both countryside. Most population, they're both 2. Space at support, no, neither of those are at support. If the reformers are a player, and I treat bots as players. Okay. So it says space at opposition. Yeah, there is a space at opposition here. It's Eastern Mindanao. That's at opposition. So they'll select that space for terror. So the MPA paid a resource for that, activated their underground guerrilla, placed a terror marker, and shifted the space away from opposition and to neutral. Because they were looking for a limited command, that's all for their turn. The next card is Chinese Aid, and only the MPA and the reformers are eligible this time. So the MPA is up first, and they're not interested in this card. So they're going to look for a command and special activity to do. Here's the next card for the MPA. So 3d6 greater than resistance plus MPA bases on the map. Resistance plus MPA bases is at 5. So they had to roll on that, and they rolled an 8. So the answer is yes. So we move on. Underground guerrilla in or adjacent to any city with no terror, resistance, or support and may perform special activity. Yes, all that is true. There is an underground guerrilla adjacent to Manila. There's no terror, resistance, or support in Manila. And the MPA can do a special activity here. Okay, so they're going to use march. They're going to march using move priorities. So they can march from any space with guerrillas. So I've marked all spaces on the map with guerrillas, and they're going to use the move priorities. The first part of which has them selecting a destination using their space selection priorities table. Okay, so we go back over here and use, let's see, march destination here. Okay, a vulnerable MPA base. Yes, there is a vulnerable MPA base in Visayas. So that will be their destination. Although Visayas does have a vulnerable base, because there are no MPA guerrillas at all, I can already tell that this is not going to work. The only adjacent space to Visayas that has a guerrilla is Central Mindanao. And obviously they don't want to move that guerrilla because that would leave these 2 bases vulnerable. So that would be even worse. Okay, but just to be clear about this, if we did select that as a destination, and then we select an origin space, well, the origin space has to be Central Mindanao because that's the only space that's adjacent that has movable guerrillas. And then we look at what the keep priorities. We're definitely going to find out that we're going to have to keep those guerrillas there. So keep sufficient pieces to change no government control in 2 or more population spaces. That's not relevant. The next thing, keep 1 underground guerrilla in spaces with MPA base. Okay, so that means we can't move that piece, obviously. That's sort of an obvious conclusion. All right, so that's not going to work as a destination. Oh wait, I just realized. There's a Korea here in Eastern Mindanao. I forgot about that. And that is adjacent to Visayas. It's way over there, but it is adjacent. Aha, okay, so this Korea could move. Alright, so let's reconsider. Okay, so now considering the move priorities again with this other Korea from Eastern Mindanao, we see that we have to keep sufficient pieces to change no government control. That space is not a government control, there are no government pieces there, so no worries. Keep one underground Korea in spaces with an NPA base, there's no base there. Keep underground one Korea in 2+ population space with no resistance. That's worded strangely. Keep one underground Korea, I guess it means to say, in a 2 population space with no resistance. Well, that Korea is not underground, so we can't keep an underground Korea there, so we can't do that. And remember, with the keep priorities, if you can't do it completely, you ignore it. Okay, with these priorities. With these priorities here, if you can't do it completely, you just do as much as you can. Okay, so these, if you can't do it completely, you ignore. Okay, so we can't do that, so we ignore it. Keep one Korea in spaces with a strike. There's no strike there. And lastly, keep 3 acting faction Koreas or activists in space with no support and room for an available base. Okay, we can't keep 3 there. There aren't enough. So we can't do that. Okay, so that Korea in Eastern Mindanao can in fact move into Visayas. So let's see if it will happen with the actual move priorities now. The go to select pieces to get to destination. The get priorities, I guess, is what they're called. Okay, get one acting faction Korea or activist to destination. Well, there you go. That was easy. All right, so this is just going to go over there. That's it. So looking at March again, they paid a resource to move that piece. It says move Koreas from selected spaces into any adjacent spaces desired. If destination is Visayas or Cebu, which it is, move only one Korea from each origin space. Okay, that's fine. We're only going to move one anyway. If destination has support and moving Koreas plus cubes there exceeds 3, activate moving Koreas. Okay, well it doesn't. It's not at support. Okay, so that's it. So back on the movement priority table, we get down to C here, which for the MPA is the second thing on this list. Okay, if movable Koreas remain in origin. Well, no. They're not in the origin, so don't do that. If government control in destination and NPA, that is non-player NPA, may select another March origin. Okay, we're not going to do that. There's no government control in the destination. Lastly, non-player NPA may select another March origin. Go to step A. Well, we have to find out if they can select another March origin by rolling against their activation number. And we did that, and they rolled a 3. That is higher than 2, so yes, they can select another move priority. So we're back to A, which is to select a destination using the space selection priorities. Okay, so back over here. So March destination, vulnerable NPA base, not anymore. Okay, so the next priority is vulnerable government base. There are none. Next is government control. Well, there's several places with government control, so that doesn't specifically narrow it down. Okay, but we're selecting now from among the government control spaces. Space not at resistance. Okay, none of the government control spaces are at resistance. Most population. Okay, well that's Manila. Alright, so next destination is Manila. And once again, there's only one Korea that could possibly move to get into Manila, and that's from northern Luzon. So that'll be the origin automatically. So now we go through the keep priorities and see if that Korea has to stay in northern Luzon or if it can move. Okay, so first thing is keep sufficient pieces to change no government control in a 2+ population space. Well, the government already have control of that space, so moving that Korea won't change that. Next is keep one underground guerrilla in spaces with an MPA base. No base there. Keep one underground guerrilla in 2+ population spaces with no resistance. Well, that is a 2 population space with no resistance. Keep one underground guerrilla in 2 population spaces with no resistance. And that guerrilla is underground. Okay, so we're not going to move it. They do not want to move it. Alright, well there you go. It doesn't move. So this is a case where the bot did something kind of silly. I mean, the flow chart here, what led them to choose march in the first place was the idea that they would be marching an underground guerrilla into a city and then potentially doing a strike. And so it was that underground guerrilla up in northern Luzon that we said, oh, that could move into Manila. And so that's what actually caused them to choose this. But the thing is, the move priorities table tell us that we can't move it, right? We got to keep one underground guerrilla in 2 population spaces with no resistance. And that's a 2 population space with no resistance. So that guerrilla couldn't move anyway. But obviously, at the level of choosing on these flowcharts, the bot doesn't know that. But what it actually ended up doing is moving that one guerrilla from Eastern Mindanao into Visayas, which is kind of silly. I mean, it would have been better just to rally here to protect that vulnerable base. That would have been a much better idea, because then they would have been able to put 2 guerrillas here and still keep that one that's over. Keep that one over in Eastern Mindanao. So that would have been a way better way to play this instead of marching over there. That's kind of silly. But anyway, that's the way the bot was written, and bots sometimes do silly things. Alright, so there's no more marching they can do. The only other destination possible would be Central Mindanao, but they clearly are not going to move that piece. Okay, so we'll move on to a special activity. Okay, strike in up to 2 cities using shift toward resistance. Well, they don't have any pieces in the cities, so they're not going to do that. Ambush using attack in any one destination space. Okay, well, let's consider that. Well, it turns out that ambush is not possible. It says location. Any space where a guerrilla who marched or is about to attack is underground. Well, the only destination that the MPA chose was Visayas, and that guerrilla is not underground. So ambush is not possible here. Alright, so the next thing, extort in one space with the most underground guerrillas. At an MPA base, only where there's 2 or more. Well, they're not going to do this either. The locations for extort are any spaces without government control and with an underground guerrilla. Well, there's an underground guerrilla there, but there's government control there, so they can't select that. That guerrilla is not underground. This one is, and it's not government controlled, but there are bases there, and this card specifically tells us where there's an MPA base, only do this where there are 2 or more underground guerrillas. So there's nowhere for them to extort. It turns out all they did was march, that little march, which turned out to be a little bit silly. But anyway, that means they only did a limited operation. The reformers are up next, and they are not interested in this event. So they're going to try for a operation special activity. So here's the next Bonifacio card for the reformers. It starts with 3d6 greater than opposition plus reformer bases on the map. Well, opposition plus bases is at 6, so they had to roll on that, and they rolled a 11. So that is true. Okay, so next thing. Any activist in a 2+ population space with terror and no opposition and may perform a special activity. Yeah, that's true. Eastern Mindanao is such a space. It's 2 population, there's some activists, there's terror, and they're trying to do an operation and special activity here, so they can do a special activity. Alright, so the first thing they're going to do is that special activity. Canvas in one space using shift towards opposition. So the reformers would like to use canvas, which they can do in any space with activists and terror. It simply sets the space to opposition and removes any terror. Well, that's clearly Eastern Mindanao, so they're going to set that space to opposition and remove the terror. Now the reformers would like to use assemble using their move priorities. So assemble says it can be done in any space, but I mean there has to be an activist adjacent, because how it works is you move activists into adjacent spaces. Okay, so I have marked every space that has an activist adjacent to it as a possible location for assemble. Alright, so now we're going to use the move priority chart again. And so first thing we do is select a destination. We do that using the space priorities chart. Assemble destination. Okay, so first we want government control. Okay, well that narrows it down somewhat. So there are only 3 possible spaces now: Northern Luzon, Cebu, and Davao. The next priority is vulnerable reformer base. There aren't any. Space not at opposition. None of those spaces are at opposition. Most population. They're all to population. Next is space at support. Okay, well that eliminates Northern Luzon then, which is not at support. So now it's just between Cebu and Davao. Space at resistance, no. Space at neutral, no. Fewest government pieces. Okay, so that's Davao. Okay, so now they're going to do assemble. It says move any activists into selected spaces from adjacent spaces. As desired, remove terror, if any, from each destination with reformer pieces. Then as desired, remove protest from anywhere on the map. Flip any activists there where protest removed to inactive. Okay, so we're going to move activists first into selected spaces from adjacent spaces. We have to check the move priorities to see which pieces can move. So our origin is obviously Eastern Mindanao. That's the only place where only these 2 activists could get into Davao by using assemble. So we're going to consider those 2. Okay, so these are our keep priorities. Keep sufficient pieces to change no government control in a 2+ population space. Well, there's no problem there. You can move them both. That wouldn't add any government control. Next, keep activists greater than police in spaces with a reformer base. Okay, well that is important because there is a base here, but there are no police. So keeping the activists greater than the police means keeping 1 behind. That would keep it greater than the 0 police that are there. So this 1 piece can move so far. Or we have to keep 1 piece back, I should say. Okay. Oh wait, it does say greater than or equal to police. Oh, okay. So that actually doesn't imply that we have to keep 1 back. It's greater than or equal to, so 0 equal to 0. Alright, so right now we don't have to keep any pieces there. Alright, next priority, keep 1 activist in 2 population spaces with no opposition. There is opposition there, so we don't have to worry about that. Keep 3 acting faction guerrillas or activists in space with no support and room for an available base. No, we don't have as many as 3 there, so we can't do all of that, so we ignore it. Well, I'm actually a bit surprised by this, but I mean, according to the move priorities table, the reformers are going to move both these pieces, and they're going to leave that base vulnerable by doing that. I was a bit surprised by that. That's why I read the police thing the way I did, because I thought, well, surely they'll leave 1 behind to be greater than the police here. But that's not what it says. It says greater than or equal to the police. So, well, that's kind of a strange thing to say now that I think of it. Greater than or equal to. I mean, I can do that in 2 ways. I could leave 1 behind. Well, I could do that 3 ways. Leave all of them behind. That is kind of strange to put it like that. You'd think they'd say something like, keep at least 1 more or something like that. But anyway, okay, so 0 is greater than or equal to police, so I guess we can move both of these, and it wouldn't violate any of the keep rules. Okay, anyway, that's the way I read it. Let's see. Get 1. Now we're using the get options to see if we'll move them. Get 1 acting faction guerrilla or activist in destination. Okay, get one acting faction guerrilla or activist. Okay, so that means they'll move one of them. Okay, well maybe the get priorities will keep that one behind. Maybe that's what's going to happen. Okay, maybe I jumped the gun here a little. Get one acting faction guerrilla or activist in destination. Okay, so they moved one of them. Next, destination is not at support. It is at support. Okay, so we ignore that one. Get combined reformer and MPA pieces to equal or exceed government pieces. Okay, well we can't do that. Oh, okay. Well, that did it then. That left behind one. All right, so I spoke too soon. These charts did actually make it the case that one would stay behind. Since we just moved one in there. Okay, so that's the assemble for moving one activist into Devout. The reformers are now broke, so they can't select another space for assemble. Okay, so they can try to do these last few things. Remove terror from all destination spaces. Okay, there's no terror in Devout. Remove protests from all spaces at opposition, unless doing so would add government control. Because remember, assemble says they can remove protests from anywhere on the map. And there is a protest in Manila. Okay, and that space is at opposition. So, and removing this protest would not affect control at all. Okay, so they're going to remove the protest there. Go back underground. Because the reformers used a special activity, they have to go here. Okay, so on to the next card. The next card is Moro NPA Alliance, and the NPA are first eligible. This is not a critical event for them, so they're going to try for an op and special activity. Well, this is the next NPA card, and I kind of fear we're going to end up doing the same thing again. The NPA having a kind of silly turn, but let's see how it works out. It says government control in any 2+ population spaces. Yes, that's obviously true. Underground guerrilla adjacent to space with no support, and government control or vulnerable government base, and may perform special activity. Well, yes, they can perform a special activity. They do have an underground guerrilla adjacent to a space with no support and government control. That's again northern Luzon. That guerrilla is adjacent to Manila, which is government control but not at support. And they can do a special activity. So I think the answer to this is yes. But again, I don't think that guerrilla can actually move. So this is going to be a weird turn again, perhaps. Okay, so march using move priorities. Let's see what happens. So as usual, they're going to select a destination space first, which means we come over here and look at march destination. A vulnerable NPA base, there aren't any anymore. No, that's not true. Actually, this base is still vulnerable because this guerrilla is not underground. So it's not being protected by an underground guerrilla. So this is still a vulnerable base. So it looks like they're going to select this as a destination again, but they're going to have the same problem. This guerrilla here can't move, and it's the only one that's adjacent. So that's not going to work. Okay, we already know that's not going to work. All right, so we'll just carry on. Next, vulnerable government base. There aren't any. Where there's government control. Okay, that narrows it down somewhat for destinations. We're looking for one at government control. Space not at resistance. Okay, no government control spaces at resistance. Most population. Well, that's Manila. Okay, so they've selected Manila as the destination. All right, but again, we already know how this is going to go. They're not going to be able to move that piece. Okay, so when we go to the keep priorities, keep sufficient pieces to change no government control. Moving that guerrilla won't do that, so that's fine. Keep one underground guerrilla in space with an NPA base. No, there's no NPA, there's no base there. Keep one underground guerrilla in 2 population space with no resistance. Okay, that's what keeps them there. There's no resistance in that space, so they stay. Well, here's a kind of interesting point. I mean, we know they can't move this guerrilla from central Mindanao because of the bases. We know they can't move that guerrilla from northern Luzon because there's no resistance there. But there's nothing in their keep priorities that says they can't move this non-underground guerrilla from Visayas. Even though that would leave the base, well, the base is already vulnerable. But there's nothing in their priorities that says they can't move that. So, does that mean we have to keep going through these move priorities, trying to find a destination that they actually want where this piece will move? That's a little bit tedious. And it's the way the MPA work with March, right? They march from... well, how am I trying to say this? Well, the way March works is they pay per origin space. And so, you know, they select any space with a guerrilla and then they move from that space to any adjacent space. So they don't, right, the actual way they march is not by selecting destinations and then marching pieces in. The way they march is by selecting an origin and then moving to adjacent spaces. So they could, in theory, choose a space and then move guerrillas to several different destinations from it. So that makes it a little more challenging to actually implement these move priorities for them, because the move priorities demand that we select a destination first, and then we go about looking for origin spaces that could actually make it there. So anyway, let me see if I can figure out if they will actually try to march from here. So what I did is I just considered every space where this guerrilla could move as a possible destination, since it's rather tedious to go through and try to find just destination spaces, knowing that that's the only piece that could possibly move. So I just narrowed it down to those spaces, and then used their priorities to figure out which one they would select. And it turned out to be Cebu as the selection. So it looks like that guerrilla is going to move into Cebu, which is at least not a crazy thing to do. You know, the movement from eastern Mindanao to Visayas was a little silly, because rallying there would have been a better move. But this at least gets a guerrilla into a city. So that's actually at least interesting thing to do. Alright, anyway, going back to the move priorities. We already know that the get priorities are going to be satisfied here, but let's just go through them anyway. Keep sufficient pieces to change no government control. Moving that guerrilla won't do that. Keep one underground guerrilla in spaces with an MPA base. There's a base there, but this guerrilla is not underground, so that won't do that. So we can't do that one. Keep one underground guerrilla in two population spaces with no resistance. Well, again, this guerrilla is not underground. Keep one guerrilla in spaces with a strike. Well, there's no strike in this space. Okay, and then lastly, keep three acting faction guerrillas or activists in space with no support or room for an available base. Well, there aren't as many as three, so we ignore that. Okay, so this piece can move. Now, get one acting faction guerrilla or activist in destination. Well, there you go. So it's going to move over there. And that'll cost them one resource. The MPA can't move any more pieces, so that's all they're going to do with move. So they'll try and do a special activity now. Ambush using attack in any one destination space. Okay, let's see if they'll do that. Okay, they can't do that because that can only be done if the guerrilla that they moved is underground. And that one is not. Okay, so that doesn't work. Next is strike in up to 2 cities using shift toward resistance. If reformers is a player, remove activist if possible. Okay, so I'll see if they want to do that. No, they can't do this either because it also requires an underground guerrilla. So that doesn't work either. So lastly is extort, in one space with the most underground guerrillas at an MPA base, only where there's 2 or more. Okay, so we already tried this last time, it didn't work. They can't extort here because there aren't enough guerrillas to cover the bases. You need at least 2 if there's a base there. This one's not underground, so it can't be there. And that one, the space is at government control, so they can't extort there either. Okay, so it turns out that the MPA didn't do a special activity. All they did was march, so limited command. The government is up next. They're also not interested in this event, so they will try for an op and special activity. This is their next card. It says 1d6 is less than or equal to available cubes. No, there are no available cubes, and obviously you can't roll less than or equal to 0 on a 1d6, so we'll draw a new card. Here's the next card for the government. It starts with any spaces without government control. Yeah, sure, there's lots of spaces without government control. So next, any 2+ population space with control, troops, police, and no support, protest, or strike. Yeah, there are actually 2 such spaces. Both Manila and northern Luzon are under government control, have troops and police, but are not at support. And there's no terror, protest, or strike going on there. Okay. So the answer is yes. All right, government wants to train. First, they'll select spaces using place cubes. So this is another time when the bot is acting kind of silly. I mean, obviously the reason why the government want to train is that they want to use civic action. Right? The question here makes it pretty clear that that's what they're up to. But we have to start by selecting spaces using place cubes. But the thing is, the government doesn't have any cubes. They're not going to place any cubes. So it's kind of a silly priority to start with. But still, that's what the bot does. It tries to find a place to put cubes, even though it's not actually going to put any cubes there. Right? Be kind of silly. But in any case, that's what we're going to do first. And if it turns out that we select a space where no cubes are placed, well then it's as though they didn't select it, you know? But we still have to go through this procedure. Okay, so first place cubes where there's no government control. They control all the possible spaces to train right now. Vulnerable base of any faction. None of those spaces have a vulnerable base. Then most population. All right, so they choose Manila. Well, they want to do civic action there anyway, so that's what they would have eventually chosen. So, no big deal. Well, hold on now. I think maybe the way we're supposed to read this, even though it doesn't specifically say this, is that we're selecting spaces using place cubes to select a space to place cubes. I mean, that's a reasonable interpretation, right? And so maybe the way we should think about it is, oh, they've selected Manila, and now they go to place cubes, and uh-oh, no cubes to place. Okay, so we're not selecting Manila then, because no cubes. And then maybe we go on to, we realize that there's no place in cubes, so don't select any more spaces. And now we're on civic action using shift toward support. And because the operation isn't limited, they can target an additional space. So now they choose an additional space using shift toward support, which makes more sense. That's what they're trying to do. So they would use their shift toward support priorities to select that space. So maybe that's the way we're supposed to read it. I think that's sensible. I mean, it doesn't say that here. It just says select a space using place cubes. But if they don't have any cubes, that's a little silly. All right, so I think that's the way I'm going to read it. Okay, so let's suppose that they did select Manila to place cubes, and then, oh, no cubes to place. Okay, so they don't pay for Manila. They don't select it as a space because they can't do that. Okay. And now, realizing that they don't have any way to place any cubes, they say, okay, forget that, and they move on. Do the star bit next and end this and train. Okay, so I want to read it like that. So what they're going to do is they're going to do civic action using shift toward support to select a space. All right, so they're using these shift toward support priorities. And the first one is, if the reformers are a player, the space at opposition. Well, lo and behold, what's the space at opposition but Manila? So we end up doing the same thing anyway, but at least for a sensible reason this time. Okay, so they're going to select Manila to do some civic action. So we're told that they'll do up to 1d3 steps of shifting. So they have to roll a die to figure that out. And they rolled a 2, which for a D3 is 1. So they're only going to shift this one space. Sorry, they're only going to shift this 1. So that just removes the opposition, doesn't put any support in. Alright, so they had to pay 2 just to select the space, even though they didn't have any cubes to put in it, and then they pay another 2 to shift the space. Okay, so the government is not going to select any more spaces for train. They're going to move on to their special activity. Alright, so 83 campaign or later, yes, we are now in the 83 campaign. So they'd like to enrich in one space with activists or underground guerrillas using enrich. So let's see if they'll do that. So there are 3 spaces where they could use enrich. Cebu, Zamboanga, and Davao. And our priority, the card here says enrich in one space with activists or underground guerrillas using enrich. Well, there is an activist in Davao. There's a guerrilla in Cebu, but it's not underground. So they're going to enrich here, which means they add 4 to patronage and set the space to neutral and lose 1 aid. Okay, so the government chose an op and special activity. So I'm going to end this video here. I think this video has been long enough. And so we'll pick it up again next time. I hope you join me then. Till then, bye.